Hello, I'm Aaron McMillan, Managing Director of Operational Policy and Support at United Airlines. While the past year has been challenging for us all, it has also helped launch innovative new collaborations and ideas that put safety and cleanliness at the forefront of the travel experience. Our partnership with the experts at the Cleveland Clinic has played an instrumental role in our United Clean Plus program and the enhancement of our safety measures. On behalf of United and GBTA, I'd like to introduce Dr. Amanda Hagen of the Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Hagen is the Medical Director of Cleveland Clinic AtWork. A graduate of Jefferson Medical College and former U.S. Naval flight surgeon, she currently oversees their occupational health and on-site clinic services for local, regional, and national employers. She is double board certified in occupational medicine and preventive medicine and public health. Dr. Hagen is here today to speak to the science of COVID-19, its impact on travel, and how testing and vaccinations are helping restore confidence in our business today and for the future. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Hagen, and we hope you enjoy.
Hi, everyone. I am happy to be here today to help kick off the finale for you for your Ready Safe Travel experience that you guys have been having. It sounds like you've had a really great program, and I'm glad that I can be a part of it. So I am going to talk to you a little bit about moving beyond the pandemic. So as was mentioned before, where we are right now, how vaccinations, better treatments, how all of these things are aligning to get us back to normal. Okay. So the agenda for today, I'm just going to give a little bit of an update. I'm going to talk about, like I said, where are we now from more of a global perspective. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how the vaccines work, because there's a lot of mystery out there about how these vaccines work, which leads to a lot of fear, which leads to vaccine hesitancy. I can assure you that there is nothing to fear when it comes to these vaccines. And so I will explain all of that to you. And then I'll talk about how that plays into our bigger plan to get everybody back to work, back to travel, back to our real lives. And I'll end it by talking about, where are we going with all of this? What does a new normal look like? So just to get started, this is a graph of cases of COVID across the entire globe. So you've seen these for the United States. They're different, obviously, in each country. As you can see here, it started out around February of 2020, and it was slowly increasing. Then there was a spike. There's been a second spike. That's true around the world. Now, in the United States right now, you will see the same type of shape, except that the peak at the end has gone way down. So there are minimal cases happening now. If you take a look at this is the rate of global vaccination, okay? You can see that we are now up to about 25 million doses per day given out around the world. That's huge, and it's continuing to rise. Another thing that has happened recently, and I'm sure you guys are aware, but if you're not, they have now approved in the United States the Pfizer vaccine for children ages 12 to 16. So originally the vaccine was approved for 16 and above, and now 12-year-olds and above can get it. It's a very safe and effective vaccine. I actually just got my children vaccinated. They're 12 and 14, much to their dismay, I might add, but I did drag them to the local pharmacy to get their vaccines just a couple days ago, actually. And no side effects. They did very well. So more and more access to vaccine equals increasing vaccination rates equals decreasing amounts of COVID. So we're moving in the right direction. I did want to talk a little bit about how these vaccines work, though, because this is a bit of a mystery. And a lot of people, first and foremost, are concerned because they think, wow, these vaccinations got approved so fast. There's no way they could be safe. how did they get them through so fast? They must have taken shortcuts. The truth is they did take shortcuts, but not the way you think. The science behind the vaccines is completely sound. Where they took the shortcuts is more of the bureaucratic red tape. So think about it this way. If you go in the US to the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, everybody hates the Department of Motor Vehicles. But think about it like this. You go to the DMV, you fill out all your paperwork, you get in this really long line, you get to the front, and the woman says, you know what, you didn't fill out box F. Sorry, go back to the back of the line, fill out that, and then you can come back. What, I gotta go all the way to the back of the line and start over again? So, believe it or not, getting vaccines approved and getting medications approved are very similar to that. So there's a whole process in place, lots of paperwork involved. Many committees have to review things. Traditionally, you do one step, then the next step. So you fill out this set of papers, it has to go to this committee. Then that committee says, okay, then you fill out the paperwork again, and you take it to this committee, et cetera, et cetera. What happened with the COVID vaccine was because there was a global understanding of how important this is and how badly we need this vaccine, they cut a lot of that out. So it's as if you went to the DMV, you got there, they said, oh, you forgot to fill out box F. Here, let me do it for you real quick. Okay, you're good to go. That would never happen at the DMV, but that's kind of like what happened with the vaccine. So they were able to work together. Different parts of the vaccine approval process that would usually be done one, then the next, and the next. Many of them can be done simultaneously. Many of them can be done together, or they can work together. So that's where the shortcuts took place, not on the science itself, but the process, if that makes sense, hopefully. So as far as that goes, put that part out of your mind. Now, how do these vaccines work? I know a lot of people are worried that, oh, it's gonna mess with my DNA, I'm gonna grow a tail. No, I swear, you will not grow a tail. And it's not messing with your own DNA. So what I have here on the screen is a picture of a coronavirus. Everybody now recognizes this little buckyball thing. This is a coronavirus. So it has these little things called spikes on the outside, and you can see them there on the slide. Those are those little red things, right? Inside the virus is, they have the RNA, and it has instructions inside there for how to make these spike proteins. The spikes are really important because that's what allows the virus to stick to your cells. So the little spikes stick to your cells and allow the virus to break into your cell, hijack your cell, start using your cell's machinery to make lots and lots and lots of copies of the virus. And then the cell bursts open and the virion escape. They go to the next bunch of cells and so on and so forth. So the spike protein is unique. We don't have those in our body normally. So this is the perfect way to make a vaccine to target the coronavirus. It's to focus on these little spikes. So everybody's heard about messenger RNA vaccines, these mRNA vaccines. What the heck is that? So this is what it is. So the scientists take a little fat droplet, which on here they say lipid nanoparticle coating. Okay, it's a fat droplet. So inside the fat droplet, they put a little strand of messenger RNA, the little part that explains how to make a spike protein. So this is kind of like a recipe. So if you think of this whole thing like a restaurant, that little mRNA strand is a recipe, the recipe for a spike protein. So the vaccine injects these little fat droplets with these recipes inside into your body. Your cells pick up these little fat droplets, the recipe, and sends the recipe to the chef in your cell. The chef in your cell is something called a ribosome. And the ribosome makes proteins, okay? And in this case, the chef gets the instructions, the mRNA for the spike protein, goes, oh, I get it. Okay, no problem. I can do this. Makes a spike protein. Then sends the spike protein out to the dining room. So the dining room is the outside of the cell. Puts it outside the cell, and then there's these cells that are like garbage trucks. They come along, they pick up these spikes, and they show them to your security guards. Your security guards are your T cells. So you hear about your T cells, the immune cells, right? You have T cells and B cells. T cells are like your security guards, and the B cells are like your librarians. They're the memory cells. They remember what the spike protein looks like and make antibodies for them if they ever encounter a spike protein again. The T cells, your security guards, they see the spike protein, go, I got it. Okay, next time a spike protein comes in here, I'm kicking them out. That's what's going on here. So these spike proteins, they only last for about 24 to 48 hours in your body before they disintegrate and fall apart. The messenger RNA, that recipe, also disintegrates. As soon as the chef takes a look at the recipe, he rips it up and throws it away. That's exactly what's happening here. The messenger RNA goes through your ribosome, and it's broken down and disposed of. So there is nothing hanging out here changing your DNA or altering your cells in any way, shape, or form. And even those spike proteins, they're gobbled up basically through the trash compactor, thrown away. There's nothing left. So there's nothing left of the vaccine in your body to cause problems in the future, which is something that people worry about. And I get why they worry about it, but there isn't anything to worry about. And then from then on, it's just your immune cells that have been in your body your whole life that recognize chickenpox when they see chickenpox, or recognize measles if they happen to see measles. Well, now they recognize spike proteins. This is also important because a lot of people have been talking about variants. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? There's variants. First of all, variants happen because errors are made when the virus is making a copy of itself, right? So I know I'm all about analogies here, but if you think about your photocopy machine, you make tons of copies on your photocopy machine, and then you start to run out of toner. The copies start to get a little fuzzy. It's a little hard to see what it says. Pretty soon they're not printing at all. The same thing happens when a virus is making a copy of itself. It copies and copies and copies and copies, and then it starts to make mistakes. Those mistakes are what become variants. And that's key, because the more people we get vaccinated, the less people are getting COVID, the less opportunity there is for the virus to make copy after copy after copy and make a mistake and create a new variant. Another key thing to realize is that the vaccines do cover the variants, at least all the variants we've seen so far. And what a variant really ends up being, at least so far, the variants that we've seen are in that spike protein. So that spike protein is made up of amino acids. So you have little amino acids, one after another after another. Those are the ingredients that your ribosome used to make the spike protein. So the variants, you will see a couple of those amino acids have changed. So you normally see a typical set of amino acids. Now, a couple of them have been exchanged for other amino acids. But a spike protein is still a spike protein. Your cells have been trained to see a spike protein. So even if you change a couple amino acids, your T cells and B cells still say, well, that sure looks like a spike protein to me. I'm going after it. And so, great news, so far, there hasn't been a variant where the vaccine is not protective. So that's important to keep in mind. I wanted to talk a little bit about how the DNA vaccines work also, because many of the vaccines are mRNA vaccines, but a few of them are DNA vaccines. And that's, for example, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so interestingly enough, the DNA vaccine and the mRNA vaccine are almost the same thing. The difference is the DNA vaccine, we put it in something called an adenovirus, which is like the common cold. So we put it inside that instead of a fat droplet. So instead of a fat droplet, we're using the shell of an adenovirus of a cold. It doesn't have the rest of the stuff in the cold that makes you sick. It's just the shell, because those are really good. They look like little lunar modules, and they're very good. They land on the surface of your cell, and they kind of get sucked into your cell. And if it were the common cold, it would then do the same thing that COVID does. It would hijack your ribosomes and tell your chefs, no, you're going to make copies of me instead. All heck breaks loose, right? So we got rid of all that stuff. So the only thing that's inside these little cold viri is the DNA for the spike protein, okay? So this is like the cookbook. So we're sending the cookbook into the cell, and the recipe, the messenger RNA, is pulled out of the cookbook. And then it's exactly the same process. So you're really skipping one step ahead in the vaccine process and the spike protein process when you're using a DNA vaccine. But the end result is the same. Your cells learn how to temporarily make spike proteins. Your T cells and your B cells see them. They know in the future, if they ever see them again, they need to react. I heard an interesting analogy for this, this process. It's, imagine you're sitting at home and somebody tries to break into your house. This is actually a great explanation for why people get more symptoms from the second vaccine than the first, because you hear about, oh, they felt much worse after the second vaccine. This is why. So you get your first vaccine. It's like you're sitting at home on the couch watching TV and somebody tries to break in. What the heck? What are you doing here? You chase them out of your house. Well, now you know someone could break in. So you go out and get security cameras, alarm systems. You have the police on speed dial. You're ready to go. The second vaccine is like that guy came back a second time. And this time you're prepared. The alarms go off. The cops show up. You know, we take care of it. That's the difference between the first and the second. So the second shot, you have a much stronger immune response. So you're more likely to get some side effects. It's not because you got COVID from the vaccine. You're not temporarily sick. You can't get other people sick because you had the vaccine. Nothing like that. It's just your immune system reacting to that shot. Also, don't worry if you get that second shot and you don't really have a lot of side effects, because some people think, well, if I didn't get real sick after the second shot, my immune system must not be working. No, that's also not true. You're fine. You're still getting that immune response. Some people just get a stronger reaction than others. It doesn't mean you have less of an immune response. This is CDC, the new CDC recommendations in the US. And now I realize that everyone listening everyone's from all over the world. So not necessarily following the CDC. But the reason I want to discuss this is because the CDC and the World Health Organization and other similar organizations around the globe mirror each other. So if the CDC does one thing, often other groups are going to follow suit. As far as vaccination rates and COVID cases, the US is a little further ahead than other countries. As far as having more people vaccinated and having less cases, but everyone else is getting there. So it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I suppose the US is towards the front of the pack in the marathon, but we're all in the same race and we're all going to the same finish line. And we're all going to get to the same place. So this is important to realize, because even if you're in a country that isn't following, CDC recommendations, there's a good chance this is where your country is going to head. So this past week, the CDC came out and said that moving forward, people who are fully vaccinated, so that is, you've had your vaccine And depending on which one, obviously the J&J vaccine is a 1 dose. Pfizer, Mrna, those are 2-dose vaccines. So 2 weeks after your final dose, either your 1 and final or your 2nd and final dose of the vaccine, you're considered fully vaccinated and therefore fully protected. At that point forward, you no longer need to wear a mask or physically distance in any type of setting, except, because there's always an except, if your state law, your local law, your territorial law, or even your local business rules say otherwise. If they have something that's more strict than that, you should default to that. However, the CDC says you no longer need to wear a mask or physically distance if you're fully vaccinated. That's something I think is missing because a lot of states decided, oh, that's fantastic. We're not going to require masks anymore. That wasn't quite in the spirit of what the CDC was saying. They were saying you need to be vaccinated, albeit it's very difficult to track who's vaccinated or not. I mean, could you imagine, being the guy at the front door for a big box store, and it's your job to check everybody's vaccine cards and say, nope, you're good. Nope, you're bad. You can't. You got to wear a mask. That would be terrible. It's really hard to track. So a lot of it ends up being on the honor system. The good news is, though, is that if you are fully vaccinated, you're protected. The vaccines are over 95% effective. There was a lot of concern in the beginning that maybe you could still get COVID or spread COVID. As far as being an asymptomatic spreader, it really doesn't look like that's happening. So you almost, I guess they're called like zombie spreaders. Like they're fully vaccinated, but they can still get COVID and not know it and spread around. That is not happening. We're not seeing that. There is still a small chance that you could get COVID if you are fully vaccinated, because it's 95% effective, not 100. But even if you're in that 5%, those folks who, if they do catch COVID, it's a much less severe case. And there is some evidence coming out that they might not even have enough of a viral load, enough virus in their body to really spread it. So that's all really good news. So if you're a fully vaccinated person and you're out in public, you're safe. So another thing that they're doing for fully vaccinated people is that if you are fully vaccinated and you come in close contact with somebody who does have COVID, they are positive for COVID and they're not vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine. You don't need to go get tested. We don't need to do that anymore either because the vaccines are very effective. The big exceptions to these rules, in addition to what I mentioned before, is also hospitals, detention centers, homeless shelters, correctional facilities. Those are a little more sensitive locations. So they might choose to do something differently. Now, if you are fully vaccinated and you start getting COVID symptoms, you should still go get a test. You don't have to do it if you were hanging out with your buddy Bob and Bob turned out to get COVID. You don't have to. But if you are sick, you should go ahead and get tested for COVID. Talk to your physician or your provider. And then, obviously, as you guys are all familiar, there are travel requirements as well. So the CDC puts out travel requirements. Various countries have their own travel requirements. Many require that you are vaccinated before arriving in that particular place and or testing before arrival, after arrival. So you want to check with your local area to make sure you're following the correct protocol for travel. But the good news is we are able to start traveling. So key points for non-vaccinated people, and there are a lot of reasons why people don't get vaccinated. And it's not just people, oh, I don't trust the vaccine. There is some of that, obviously, but there are some really legitimate reasons, such as religious reasons for people not getting vaccinated. Perhaps they've had severe reactions to vaccinations in the past, and it's not safe for them to get vaccinated. So first, I want you all to keep in mind, don't be mean to the people who aren't vaccinated, because it's very possible they have a legitimate reason that they're not vaccinated. Those folks, we want to be mindful for them. And so they need to continue to wear a mask and physically distance when they're out in public. If they are around people who are vaccinated, they are protected automatically because the people around them are vaccinated, but they still want to be safe, especially in crowded areas, sporting events, things like that, where people might encounter somebody who has COVID. So taking that extra step, if you are a non-vaccinated person, is important. Okay, so that's the end of what I had as far as prepared material. I know there were a few questions that came in. So the first question that was asked, what permanent changes do you foresee with public engagements as a result of lessons learned from COVID? For example, PPE, sterilization, social distancing, things like that. Okay. So I do think we are going to see some permanent changes as a result of COVID. Actually, I think a lot of them are positive. We have a greater awareness of our own health and how our own health affects others. That's crucial. So believe it or not, I was an East Asian Studies and Japanese language major when I was in college. And I studied in Japan twice, once in high school, once in college. And over in Japan, it's completely normal to wear a mask if you're sick. And it has been for years, not because of COVID. It's been like this for a really long time. So if you happen to go there or to many of the other Asian countries, people feel a duty if they're sick and they're going to be out in public to try to prevent others from getting sick. So they'll wear a mask. I have a feeling that we're going to be much more open to this moving forward, not just in those Asian countries, but around the world. I think people are more likely to put on a mask if they're sick to help other people. I think we have a better understanding of the importance of cleaning and sterilization. I don't know that we'll continue at the rate that we've been. There was a point during the pandemic where we were sanitizing our grocery bags and wiping down high-touch surfaces like every 15 minutes practically. We're not going to be at that extreme, but we are going to, I think, see an increased focus at baseline for cleanliness, sterilization, things like that. Social distancing, that's a good one too. So I don't know that people will consciously be doing it, but I think we've all kind of gotten used to standing in a queue and being 6 feet apart. I don't know that we'll maintain 6 feet apart forever, but I think it's sort of trained us to keep a little more distance between ourselves and people we don't know. So I think we'll probably see ourselves a little more spread out moving forward. Next question. Travel suppliers have all enhanced their cleaning and sanitation protocols, whether it is the airlines, hotels, cars, or rental companies. Given that vaccines will be more widely adopted globally, from a medical perspective, is it important to have enhanced cleaning and sanitation protocols be a long-term commitment for these travel suppliers, even once we are at mass vaccination? Yes, to a point. So I do think it's important to keep up with protocols that involve sanitation and cleaning, not necessarily to the extreme. Like I mentioned before, we were at a point where we were trying to hit high touch points every hour. So what we've learned from COVID is it doesn't really live on surfaces quite the way we thought it did. And we don't really have good cases of people getting COVID from touching doorknobs. I will say, however, that we do have great data for people catching colds and flus, not necessarily COVID specifically, but other types of illnesses from high touch surfaces. So I think it's important to clean those areas, not necessarily for the prevention of COVID, but just in general. I think in general, it makes sense. One important thing to note, this past year, we really didn't have much of a flu season. That's because of all of these things that we've had in place. So we were already reacting to COVID when flu season would have happened. So we were already masking, distancing, cleaning, hand sanitizing, and as a result, the flu never really got a chance to take hold. That's fantastic. Let's keep it that way. So I think it's especially important in your individual cold and flu seasons to make sure you're wiping things down frequently. It just doesn't necessarily have to be obsessive, just keeping up on that. At what percentage of global mass vaccination should we be allowed, or should we be able to allow for free movement and travel similar to a pre-COVID state? And is it realistic that we will get to that percentage around the world? I think this is a combination answer, honestly. Theoretically, we talk about this thing called herd immunity, and herd immunity is when you've either vaccinated or through naturally catching a disease, a certain percentage of your population is immune, and that protects everybody else. I don't have the picture right now, but there are great pictures on the internet that'll show a crowd of stick figures and show how if they're all susceptible, no one is immune, a virus goes ping, 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 like ping ball all around the place. And then it shows how if you vaccinated certain percentages, the virus can't bounce around. It's very similar to the state of Ohio had a public health commercial several months back, and it was for the spread of COVID itself. It wasn't even about vaccinations. I wish they would have altered the commercial a little once vaccines came out. What they did is they took a bunch of mouse traps. They set up these mouse traps everywhere. They put ping pong balls on it, and they put them all real close together. They bounced a ping pong ball through the room, and it set off all the traps. And they all started bouncing, and that was supposed to replicate the spreading of COVID. So if you were to do that same experiment with vaccination, you could take some of those mouse traps, already spring them, and intersperse them amongst the ball-loaded mouse traps, right? Then you bounce a ball through, and only a couple mouse traps would go off because the ball wouldn't be able to hit the next ball, trigger it, hit the next ball, trigger it, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a great visual of how the vaccines work. So everybody's obsessed with a number. What is that percentage that we need to be at in order to stop the spread? It's not an exact science, which people don't like to hear. But if you talk to epidemiologists, most of them will say that it's probably around 70% of your population, especially for COVID. Now, that number goes up or down depending on what type of an illness it is. For example, measles. Measles is extraordinarily catchable, right? It's very infectious. It spreads very, very quickly. And for measles, your population has to have about a 90% immunity rate in order to stop the spread. That's really high. But for COVID, it looks like it's probably more around 70%. I think some places around the world will get there no problem. I think other places around the world won't. So you'll kind of have to look at the globe as a whole. And I think as a globe, we can get to that point. I know in the US right now, we're around a 50% vaccination rate, maybe a little higher right now. I've heard 60, but it depends on who you're talking to and what data source you're using. If you add on top of that another 15% of the population got COVID and therefore has natural circulating antibodies, you're pretty close to that magic number of 70%. And that could be why we're seeing cases really drop off here in the US. But globally, I think we're going to get there. It'll just take some time. The most important takeaway, though, is the more people who are vaccinated, the faster we get to that point. What is the medical perspective on fully vaccinated individuals being carriers of COVID? Okay. Either symptomatic or asymptomatic, and should this be a consideration when thinking about vaccinated individuals resuming active travel and engaging in public activities and meetings? So we actually touched on this a little bit in the talk. The medical perspective for fully vaccinated folks and their risk for catching COVID, it's not 100%, like we talked about before. The vaccine is 95% effective, so there's a 5% chance you're going to fall into that area where you're still susceptible to COVID. But those folks who fall into that category thus far, who've caught COVID, had very mild cases. And like I mentioned, there's some science coming out now, some research that's starting to show that those folks, even when they did get COVID, it wasn't necessarily spreadable. And part of that is they have some immunity from the vaccine, so their viral load doesn't get high enough to spread the COVID to other people, if that makes sense. You have to have enough virus in your system to be able to start shedding it and spreading it to other people. And it looks like people who are fully vaccinated, even if they do get COVID, they don't fall in that category. So that same thing applies to asymptomatic. It doesn't matter if you're symptomatic or asymptomatic. It doesn't look like it's a concern. So if you are fully vaccinated, you're very well protected and you should be able to travel safely. Well, I think that's all of the questions. I don't see any others. I would like to give a little bit of some parting thoughts just about, where we're going, what life looks like, especially for the global travel industry. I'm excited for you guys. I think we are finally getting back on track, and we are getting to a point now where we really are going to get to start traveling again, not just domestically, but internationally. And that's huge. Not only will we be able to travel for business, which will help all of our economies, but we'll be able to travel for pleasure too. And it's been one heck of a year and a half, and lots of people are looking forward to being able to travel again. So I think you guys need to be prepared, because I think you're going to get pretty busy pretty quickly. But I guess the biggest take home is vaccinations. Obviously, if you can get vaccinated, please get vaccinated. If you have friends and relatives, encourage them to get vaccinated. Please feel free to share my story about the ribosome chef and the whole thing. I've used that personally when talking to friends and family, and explaining it that way seems to be really reassuring. Please steal it, use it, tell it to your friends and family. And I think, especially if we're vaccinated, travel safe. And then even if we're not able to vaccinate, I think we're going to reach a point where, because everyone else is vaccinated, those folks will be safe too. So I'm excited. I'll have to start planning some trips. Thank you guys. Congrats on hitting the end of your program, and I hope this was informative.